Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you. That is body camera video from the Las Cruces Police Department. Officer Christopher Smelzer is heard making the choke you out comment to a suspect who later died, Antonio Valenzuela. Smelzer was relieved of his duties and Las Cruces police announced that neck restraints would no longer be allowed. This shocking video coming not long after this video that led to a national movement for police reform. It shows Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin with his knee on the neck of George Floyd for over 8 minutes, with Floyd dying after the incident. This candlelight vigil in downtown Las Cruces, just one of many protests across the nation calling for change. Welcome to Issues and Answers Police Oversight. I'm Fred Martino. Our program today is in partnership with the NAACP of Doña Ana County and the League of Women Voters of Southern New Mexico. For the next hour, my co-host is League Co-President Eileen Van Wee, and our guest for the first half hour of the program, New Mexico Attorney General Hector Balderas and 3rd Judicial District Attorney Mark D'Antonio. Thank you all for being with us today.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Fred.
Attorney General Balderas, I want to begin with you. I know that you called on the New Mexico legislature to require body cameras in all departments across the state. They did that, passing legislation that will make sure that we have a record if those body cameras are used as they are supposed to be in every interaction with the public. Tell me why you feel that this is such an important thing in terms of dealing with this issue of police oversight.
Well, body cameras are such an important tool, both as equipment for the officer. It improves officer safety, but it also improves transparency and accountability and reduces potential civil liabilities to cities and communities and counties across New Mexico and this country. Ultimately, it is the most modern tool to gather the best evidence, and that protects good law enforcement officers as well as supports transparent and timely prosecutions. And so it is really something that we are behind the times in implementing, but most importantly, I remind people that is just a tactical solution. There is much more to be done in improving community and officer safety across the state of New Mexico. But it was a good starting point.
Mark, your thoughts on body cameras?
I totally agree with our Attorney General. It's very important that the public is aware of what police are doing and they have a solid oversight. When an officer arrives at a scene and has his body camera working, no matter what happens, that file could be later reviewed by supervisors to correct, enhance, and to aid the officers in doing a better job next time. So it's really a good training tool, besides being, as Mr. Balderas said, a great way to enforce and gather evidence, and also to detect when officers are acting improperly. The key to the solution here is more effective oversight by our civilian authorities.
Okay, Eileen.
Thank you. District Attorney D'Antonio, what is the role of your office in protecting the civil rights of our residents?
Well, our job, basically my job and the job of my staff, is to protect all citizens of Doña Ana County from every kind of harm that's legally based. We have a duty to make sure that the police act in an appropriate way, and the police should be very cognizant of the fact that if they don't perform, or they perform a civil violation, we are going to check into it for criminal aspect of that. If not, refer the case to the Attorney General or other property authorities, including the federal government. I think we need, ma'am, in order for us to do our job, we need a uniform, systematic state laws that allow the state to monitor the police, but also give the police guidelines. And that helps the police by giving them a sure purpose and a bright line test, but also protects the public as well.
Thank you. And Attorney General Balderas, the same question for you as it applies to our state residents. What is your role in protecting the civil rights?
Well, we have a couple of areas where we can be assistive. The first is on the front end. We are part of a process that license all peace officers in the state of New Mexico. And so if there are discipline issues, if there are issues where citizens have been assaulted or their civil rights have been trampled on, citizens can file complaints against law enforcement, because every peace officer has to be licensed the way any school teacher or engineer are to be licensed in the state of New Mexico. Many times communities forget that is one area where we can enforce civil rights in terms of making sure that all law enforcement comply with protecting and defending the civil rights of all citizens. So the licensing process and the training process on the front end is an area that we try to be supportive and both accountable and responsive to the community. Finally, on the back end, we have an ability both civilly and criminally to get involved with cities and governments to hold officers accountable. The legislature has been decades behind in implementing true systemic continuity, but I can pick and choose my battles when district attorneys' offices or mayors ask me to get involved. We are now considering doing a civil rights review on the city of Albuquerque recently with the protest on the statue on how to better advise cities and law enforcement agencies to defend First Amendment rights of citizen protesters. So there's multiple ways, but civilly and criminally. And then finally, where we've been very active, we are considering prosecution of, unfortunately, death cases at the hands of law enforcement. And we are considering and conducting a review of the first case that you referenced in Las Cruces and trying to support the district attorney to make sure that we give a thorough review, a thorough prosecution, and make sure that our district attorney offices are supported throughout the land.
Thank you very much.
Attorney General Balderas, what other key reforms do you think are needed to help police departments become more proactive in addressing how officers interact with the public?
Well, I think that for many years, because New Mexico is a state that is both rural and poor, for many years we've been underinvesting in making sure that officers have the best state-of-the-art equipment and the world-class training that our officers deserve. There is an extensive debate going on in this country right now, but I believe that we can focus both on community safety and officer safety as the same solution. And we underinvest in front-end officer training as it results to use of force, as it results to cultural sensitivity and how to engage communities. And then also another area that not a lot of people are talking about in how we engage vulnerable populations, individuals with disabilities, individuals facing poverty challenges, or individuals facing other struggles. We have long embarked law enforcement agencies who even struggle how to engage in a human trafficking case where it might look like a family is struggling in poverty, but there might be sexual exploitation of children. So we have neglected that, I think, for many reasons. I think we are a poor state. We are a state that trends in the higher spectrum of violence. So we have been asking our officers to fight violent crime, to fight mental health issues, while many communities are understaffed and underfunded. And now I think really we're paying the consequences for underinvesting in making sure that officers have the best equipment, the best training, and the best incentives so that we attract the best professionals in the state of New Mexico to do public safety. We should be providing student loan grants. We should be providing free education to attract the best officers in public service. And then finally, I will say on the back end, what we've neglected is we do not have a timely ability to investigate police corruption and a timely ability to prosecute corruption when it reaches the ranks of law enforcement. For instance, right now, the district attorney and I have to come up with a case-by-case response system that takes many years. Many times I get to look at a case, it has been passed from DA's office to DA's office, or a law enforcement agency has not been designated to do a timely, immediate investigation. And so the legislature has known this is a problem for many decades. We're now paying the consequences, but I'm also calling for an independent agency that can investigate immediately when there's a potential wrongful shooting occurring in the state of New Mexico. We need to have the ability to investigate and also prosecute those cases. And right now we've been kind of playing a hot potato, and there really is no home for these cases or a system that places these cases as a top priority. I have met so many families that have lost loved ones to police shootings who discretionarily find me, look for me, and take years to pitch their case to me. And that's really not the way the system should work. We should, immediately something goes bad, we should have an independent law enforcement agency to hit the scene and build that case immediately, not take years and years for these cases to build.
Well, and of course, the Attorney General, some would argue that this is a problem all across the country. We've seen after the George Floyd case, all over the country, cases come to light, some that have happened some time ago, where there was no finding of fault, and yet the video, in many cases, is truly alarming. So something that we're seeing all over. District Attorney D'Antonio, anything that you want to add on that?
Well, I think you hit the nail right on the head by the key word of proactivity. Proactivity is so important, and so is good leadership. And we're fortunate to have an Attorney General who's very proactive and very concerned. He reached out to me, soon after the incident in Las Cruces happened, offered his support, his guidance, and that's really helpful. But what would turn the whole package together and really make things efficient is to have a uniform policy across the state, not a mishmash of all different counties and municipalities doing their own thing. Second, you need a separate independent investigation. Currently, there are many jurisdictions in New Mexico that cover and investigate their own police shootings. That's clearly a conflict of interest. So I applaud the Attorney General and totally agree that we need an independent body to investigate any kind of police misconduct, especially in police shootings.
Thank you. Eileen.
Thank you. I think Attorney General Balderas has partially responded to this next question, but District Attorney D'Antonio, what is the role of your office in addressing systemic inequities in the administration of justice?
Well, that question comes when you use the phrase justice for all. The first step there has to be, and it's a legislative fix, I believe, is that every person who comes before a court, whether it be in Albuquerque or Las Cruces, have to face the same penalties, the same consequences to law. And the charging decisions by prosecutions should be more uniform. That's the first basis of potential bias. And I think the individual DAs across the state have a real duty, an obligation to make sure they apply the law equally in all cases. And we know from history that doesn't happen enough. So we need leadership, and there's nobody better, I think, than our current Attorney General to address that problem and get all the DAs on board and make sure that there's uniformity and equality in the distribution of justice.
Thank you. Attorney General, how would you respond to that question in addition to what you've already said?
Sure. Well, I think that we could also look at funding formulas. One of the things that I think members of the press corps and advocacy groups are starting to hear, regardless of what your position is of the issue, is that ultimately, if we secure more justice, if we secure more expectations of reform, that we all have to figure out the funding challenges. And I think that the debate is doing very well when it focuses on human rights, civil rights, community policing, de-escalation, accountability, prosecuting and holding those that have power and misuse power accountable. I think we're all engaged, and I appreciate the evolution of sensitivities in corporate America. We are all demanding a better public safety and justice system, and I think that is where we all want to be. What we're behind in is we are not identifying funding formula mechanisms. We are not talking about the level of financial investment that we're all collectively willing to make. And I thought it was very telling that many of the lawmakers, in one of the most significant pieces of legislation in terms of body cameras, something that's already widely accepted and a widely known expectation of service with related body cams, that many lawmakers said, we're not going to pay for it. Well, that's half the question. Great, you don't want to pay for it, but it's public money. Then the question is, who is responsibly going to pay and make sure that we invest in all of that equipment so that, like, as the district attorney says, that there are no uneven jurisdictions, that the constitutional rights in Clayton are just as important as they are in Las Cruces or the city of Albuquerque. And I don't think that's something that lawmakers and policymakers have truly grappled with. I believe that part of enforcing the law is also in the service that you're to provide citizens. But I also believe the legislature is mandated to figure out how we should fund that equipment, because there should be no longer excuses that law enforcement can't afford the cameras. But I don't think it's fair. A sheriff's department or a police chief is not the chief primary fiduciary of enforcing public safety for the city of Las Cruces or the state of New Mexico. It's the governor, it's mayors, it's lawmakers, it's the attorney general's office. And we should really put a price tag on justice, and because ultimately that is going to also partially determine enforcing civil rights for all New Mexicans in the state.
Attorney General, as you're aware, many have noted that police officers are often acquitted when charged with a crime. In addition to body cameras, what other tools or cooperation do you need as a prosecutor to get convictions when they're warranted?
That's a great question. And I really think it's probably one of the most important questions that we must ultimately ask if we want to really bring justice for families who are now mourning the loss of their loved one due to a wrongful shooting. Two areas. The first, where trials or cases are not brought, is there is an element of justification written into state law that if the officer fundamentally, no matter how unreasonable, believes that they are justified in using deadly force, that there is a reasonable fear to their life, they can use that privilege to defend their life and take another life. And what the struggle of prosecuting, and the reason the legislature needs to look at the state law, is ultimately it requires a jury instruction that later provides that jury instruction to a jury. And that's usually where most officers walk. It's what happened way back in the historic Rodney King, where the actual citizenry could not understand how is it that they could see beating after beating on Rodney King and all these officers be justified. Well, many times it's written into state law that then requires a jury instruction to follow that state law. And so that's one area where I think that the legislature should be honest with activists and civil rights groups, that they're willing to take a look at the law in which it creates a separate standard than the average citizen, that you or I, if we were perceiving to be in a violent situation, we have a lower standard that applies to us to be held accountable for murder. And a lot of people don't understand that, from reporters to lawmakers. We have to get more deep into that issue. And then secondly, the most important that I think is the legislature has invested $0. Look at me, my face when I say this, because I want lawmakers to be confronted just on the question. I'm not trying to pass blame. But when I took over the AG's office 5 years ago, I had to self-fund an independent corruption unit that would go after elected officials who abused power. To this day, I have never been fully funded in independently and timely investigating political corruption in the state of New Mexico. Last year, I asked for funding in a domestic terrorism unit, and now I'm asking for funding for a special prosecution unit for officer misconduct. But the reason the resources are so important is it allows an independent agency to deploy the minute that potentially police corruption occurs. I believe that it is so important to preserve and protect the case for prosecution, and that also you have independent prosecutors that are building the case from day one. And I don't understand why there's been a failure to proportionally invest relative to the size of the problem. But the truth of the matter is there is no specified agency right now that is actually building cases when there's a public outcry. When something doesn't look right in video is when I believe an independent unit should be getting deployed to begin to investigate and do it independently. But most importantly, timeliness is probably, in independence, the most important factors. I've had a very successful record at independently. It doesn't matter if they're district attorneys. It doesn't matter if they're secretaries of state. It doesn't matter if they're members of my own party. We prosecuted recently a DWI of a very powerful Senate chairman in New Mexico. It's because we had an ability to timely investigate and independently prosecute. But the black eye for New Mexico is we independently have funded that out of our own funding. I just couldn't wait for legislative funding. But what I don't want to happen in areas of police accountability is there seems to be a lot of momentum. And I just want to make sure that lawmakers write the check that citizens are deserving so that they can get immediate accountability. And you're not left, D'Antonio and I are both pulling prosecutors from domestic violence units and DWI units to try to build these law enforcement cases. And the public really needs to ask lawmakers, why are we underinvesting in police accountability? And that's a system thing that journalists and citizen groups like yourself can make all the difference. They're more accountable to all of you than they are even us.
So District Attorney D'Antonio, those investments, in addition to body cameras, what other investments do you need to have that timeliness that the Attorney General was talking about and the thoroughness that is necessary? Because as we said, many of these cases where charges are brought against a police officer all across the country, the officers are acquitted.
Yeah, I hate to sound like a broken record, but I completely agree with the Attorney General. There's a domino effect in the police work. When you fund the police well and they are well trained, now I want to get back to my original point, and there's a uniformity in the application of the law, that's the path you have to take. So with that procedures in place, if the legislators would see fit to make those three things happen, continuity, special investigators that are unbiased and unaffiliated with the police agency, then you're starting to see a course correction, which down the road will strengthen the public's faith in the police and also be good for the police office to have solid, clear, bright line rules that are applicable throughout the state. That's the beginning of creating a cohesive unit. I was an FBI agent for a while, and our rules and regulations were very precise, and there was little room for misinterpretation. Unfortunately, some of our rules in our laws are subject to interpretation, and that shouldn't be.
Okay. And we just have a few minutes left, so Eileen, I want to give you a chance to get to your question. This will be the last question.
Okay.
Okay. Well, most police officers do want to follow their oath and to preserve and protect, but this question, and we're talking about policing oversight today, but so this next question has to do with some data from the last 5 years as far as the number of police officers that were involved in wounding or killing a person or being charged for a crime or convicted of a crime. How does that work out in our county, District Attorney D'Antonio?
In Diana County, we are fortunate that, except for the present case, which is on every top of everybody's mind,
Yeah.
and rightfully so, and it should be. We've had very little controversy in my jurisdiction. Whenever there's a police shooting or police activity, we have a group of attorneys, which I head. We are debriefed thoroughly by the police. We follow up with the information that we need, and so far that's worked. My only real concern about that, ma'am, and something I'd like to get changed statewide, as like I mentioned earlier, is that the police agency involved in a shooting should not be directly involved or lead the agency's investigation of the police officer. There's too many chances for bias, and sometimes police agencies have to weigh the civil consequences with the criminal consequences, and it creates a mess. So an independent body investigating that would really go a long way to resolving our issue.
Okay, thank you. Attorney General, what's the data or information you can give us from a state perspective of the numbers of police officers involved in wounding, killing, and being charged for and or convicted of a crime?
Sure, we studied this, and in 2016 we surveyed all departments and studied policies and procedures and also data. And what we find is, unfortunately, it tracks with other areas of risk because New Mexico is poor, under-resourced. We have too many officer shootings. I believe that we could work on giving officers alternatives to deadly use of force or violent use of force. But I will say this, and unfortunately it tracks, we don't invest enough in a safety net. Public safety and public health both complement each other. We also lead the nation in gun ownership. We also have way too high rates of domestic violence and other forms of violence in the state of New Mexico. So we're also asking our officers and our public health officials, our frontline responders, to do too much. We have, unfortunately, very high-risk populations. But we do have some advantages. Number one, I have seen the dialogue and the governance and the community really start to get at true questions. And so I'm optimistic. New Mexico is a small enough state that if we can get some momentum, we can invest more in public health that will reduce safety outcomes. We can also transform. I believe today we should be talking about really demanding and helping build the best world-class law enforcement organizations in the world. We should be leading the country. And then ultimately in other areas like cultural sensitivity, making sure that our community is truly being protected, not only by law enforcement, but by public school teachers and public health counselors. That's really a conversation that will be solved in two areas. The first is our families. This has to be a discussion and dialogue at all of our family households. We all as citizens in New Mexico have a right to set the standard of accountability and service. And then secondly, we're blessed, whether we like it or not, our elected officials are more accessible and down the street at a coffee shop more than in California or New York. So,
and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of discussion with those public officials over the time ahead.
Don't give up in holding elected officials accountable. They can do something special in the next few years.
Well, we appreciate you giving us the opportunity to have this dialogue today, and certainly we hope to have more conversations in the future. New Mexico Attorney General Hector Balderas and 3rd Judicial District Attorney Mark D'Antonio. Thank you both for being with us.
Thank you so very much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Fred, for this opportunity.
Thank you.
I enjoyed it myself.
Good.
The one thing I can say is accountability and proactivity are the two key words.
Thank you. This is Issues and Answers, Police Oversight. I'm Fred Martino. We continue our conversation now with Las Cruces Mayor Ken Miyagishima and City Councilor Johana Bencomo. My co-host again is League of Women Voters co-president Eileen Van Wee. Mayor and Johana, thank you so much for joining Eileen and myself for this program today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Mayor, I want to begin with you. As you know, many people are concerned about policing here and across the nation. You, as I understand it, have expressed some opposition to a citizen review board for complaints against police. Tell us about your opinion on this.
Okay, so Fred, let me clarify that. I mean, as far as complaints are concerned, I have no problem in having citizens complain regarding the regarding the Las Cruces Police Department, whether they go through city manager, the police chief, myself, which I have actually sat in on several of those. What I was of the impression was if there's some type of investigation, the Citizens Review Board to see whether or not what's going to happen to this officer. So I guess I'm sorry if that wasn't clear. I have no problem with residents being able to file complaints against the police department. I think they should be able to do that.
Yes, and that was not my question. My question was about your opposition to a citizen review board. Can you explain why you oppose the idea of a citizen review board?
Sure. A couple things. First off, one, the Citizens Review Board, if the way I think you are looking at the makeup or the breakdown of it, is more of a reactionary progress or process. I would rather be more proactive. And so I'm recognizing that my colleagues and members of the public would like to see some type of accountability on behalf of not only our department, City of Las Cruces, but also allow residents to participate. So I think you're going to see in the coming weeks some discussion similar to the Las Cruces Utilities Board, where I appoint 3 council members to that, and then we actively solicit 4 members of the public to join on this board. And so those 7 individuals review various policies of the Las Cruces Utilities. And so if we were to have something like that, I don't have a problem with. I think that's something there would be something in the right direction to allow the public to have access to see exactly what type of policies and procedures does the Las Cruces Police do and what type of input can they have as far as how should they handle certain issues.
So citizens advising the city on policy, but not evaluating complaints. So I take it then that you prefer to hire a company to do that, as the city has done in the past?
Yes, back in 2009, 2010, the city hired one company called PERF, Police Executive Research Forum, and they actually found about 90 deficiencies in the department.
And why do you prefer hiring a company as opposed to having city residents, a diverse mix of city residents, evaluating complaints against police?
Well, although we're the second largest city in the state, there's a lot of opportunities for someone to know someone on the board or being looked at or any type of concern. So I would prefer that it be kind of removed. We hire this one company that actually goes in and looks at all the complaints and shares with the council every 6 months what they have found, which they have found several things. And getting back to the original discussion I was telling you, they actually found 90 items that needed to be corrected. Then Chief Williams corrected about almost 95% of them in his first year and really brought the department to a higher level. And I believe that it was sustained from Chief Montoya, Chief Gallagher as well.
Mayor, don't you think, for playing devil's advocate here, that there could be a process if you had a citizens review board for people to abstain from considering certain complaints if they know the officer or the officer's family, in the same way that you might abstain from a vote as mayor if you know someone who is before the council, or you have an interest as a business owner on something?
Oh, I'm sure that's a possibility, but I guess what I'm trying to get at is, I don't think there is really no best practice when it comes to a citizen review board. I know that there are several different models throughout the United States, and whether or not one works as opposed to the other, I think that's still yet to be seen. Last count, I think there's probably at least 15, 16 different models. And so I just feel that perhaps an outside agency that should have no ties to the city would be better served when it comes to complaint. Keep in mind, the city manager, chief, or myself, I know I've sat on individually on over 10 complaints throughout the year. And sometimes residents take me up on it, and sometimes we have to move forward on other things.
Okay, thank you, Mayor, for your opinion on this. Johana, I know you have a different opinion on this. Your thoughts on the idea of a citizens review board when there are complaints against police officers?
Thank you, Fred, and thank you both for having us both on today and for having this conversation in this moment. I think it's really critical that we continue to do so. Regarding the Citizens Oversight Committee, I actually think that it can be both. I think that it can be both a company, an organization that is used to doing these kinds of reviews that the city would hire. My only concern with only having that is that often these companies are made up of other police officers or ex-police officers, which to me is deeply concerning and continues to sort of be this revolving door of officers overseeing each other, which I think allows a lot of room for bias. I think an external citizen review committee would fill in some of those gaps, and it would definitely be to look at some complaints, but it additionally would be to look at training materials. How are officers being trained? How are we looking at use of force policies? How are we looking at some of these policies that really are about this sort of social contract that we have with police officers and community to ensure that that the community is feeling like there is some sort of accountability, that there is some sort of oversight. So I think a citizen review committee, and like the mayor said, we would form one that best suits Las Cruces, the size of our city, given some of those concerns that he has. I think perhaps this idea of forming a board much like the utilities board is also a great idea. I just think that it is critical that we have citizens be part of the oversight of the Las Cruces Police Department, which when you look at the breakdown of our budget, the department receives the largest portion of the general fund taxes. Those are people's tax dollars that we should absolutely have rigorous and good accountability measures in place, given that fact.
Okay, and of course some would argue and have argued elsewhere that another issue in terms of having a citizen review board is that while it may be opposed by some in the police department, should a matter go beyond the city and go into court, there is that opportunity where citizens may be judging matters on a jury, depending on the type of case. So it would be an opportunity to have a real assessment from people similar to that process. Certainly, probably not as many people, but average citizens who may have very different opinions from folks who work for a company doing this kind of assessment. We move on now to our next question. Eileen.
Thank you. It's important to recognize that a majority of the peace officers are in our community to honor their oath to protect and serve. And yet there are exceptions that happen. Councilor Bencomo, how would you characterize the process and outcomes of investigations involving our city police officers?
Thank you. Yes. I think right now I would characterize those as insufficient. I think, and I want to address also the point you made at the beginning of your question, which I thought was interesting, which I absolutely agree. I think there's a lot of men and women who joined the Las Cruces Police Department or any police department to truly, truly help their community. This is not about as we often hear, the good apple versus the bad apple. This is about a systemic issue that has plagued police departments and law enforcement for years all over the country, not just here. But I think given that all politics are local, and that's who the mayor and I represent is our communities here in Las Cruces, that we have to certainly localize the issue. I really believe that this is why there is such a mistrust. This is why there is such anger and frustration that we've seen all over the country, because these investigations have not been sufficient. They have left people behind. There has not been justice or due process that have been served to many families that have been directly impacted by the issue of police violence and police brutality. And again, I think we live in such a small community at the end of the day that we all know folks that are law enforcement. And this isn't about the judgment of a personal, the characteristics of a person, a personality. Again, this is about the system, the systemic wide ways in which law enforcement has unfortunately failed our communities. And I think as a community and as local governments, we have over-relied on police and on the criminal justice system to really take care of some of the social problems in our communities. And I think that's why when today there's a call for divesting from police and investing in communities, there's such a shock effect to that, because we are so used to, like I said, over-relying on police departments to really handle a lot of the social problems in our communities. And that's something that we need to move away from. And I think that's something that the Las Cruces City Council has a responsibility to do.
Thank you. Mayor Miyagishima, how would you characterize the process and outcomes of investigations of our local police force?
Okay, now, are you talking about when there's an officer that is accused of doing something, or
yes, when there's a complaint? Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the way I understand it, that it pretty much goes to the state police, and then they have an investigative team to review the information, and then if it's something that may be criminal, they'll take it up to the district attorney to see what he decides to do, should he prosecute or not. Keep in mind, there was an instance where, I guess it was probably maybe 2 years ago, maybe 3, I don't know, time sure seems to fly, where of course there was an officer accused of misconduct, was found guilty, and actually is in prison now. So I think overall it's been good.
Mayor, I want to move on to another question now. The city, as you know, does use body cameras. Do you know if the footage from those body cameras is routinely reviewed to assess how officers are handling interactions with the public? If not, would you agree that that might be a good proactive approach?
I'm not aware of that, Fred. I do know that one of the issues is, of course, storage. And so I think what I'm trying to get at is, I believe that the footage is only available for so many weeks unless you particularly put it aside and save it. So I would think that just like anything else, it's probably after so many weeks, it's reused again.
Do you know if they're used on every call in the city?
They're supposed to be.
They're supposed to be. Okay.
Yes.
Of course, that's the new requirement from the state of New Mexico, from the legislature approving that bill.
But getting back to your question, I do actually like that.
Yeah.
To be able to review how they interact with the public.
Yeah,
it's
a proactive approach, and that's something that has been advocated by many people, including, I guess, earlier in this program by yourself, in terms of talking with citizens about ideas. and sometimes might reveal problems before they become complaints.
Right. I would like to share with you an incident that happened to me several years ago, that if they had cameras, I would have loved to have been able to see that footage. So it was 1978. I think it was probably before the councilwoman was born. I was learning how to drive. I had just got my license. I was about 15 and a half. And I was driving my pickup towards Mesilla. And I did a U-turn over there. There used to be a Pickwick at the corner of Union and Highway 28. It's not there anymore. So I went there for a ride, turned around in the parking lot of Pickwick. And before I got out, there must have been 7 or 8 police cars. And I got out of the truck, and immediately I was told to get on the ground, which I did, put my hands out, and I heard the guns, the weapons lock and load. And for a split second, I can still remember, I thought to myself, you know what, I'm gonna get killed today. And so, and then seconds later, I overheard one of the officers talk to the person in charge. They said, oh, that's not him. I think we caught the guy. So apparently there had been an armed robbery at that Pickwick. And I didn't realize the distinction between sheriffs and police officers. And I believe it was the sheriff's department, because I was out in that area. I was outside the city limits. But what I'm trying to get at is, no one came to me and said, hey, I'm sorry about that. No, I asked, I guess I'm free to go. They don't even really even tell you that. They just took off. And so for a long time, obviously that was something there that bothered me.
I can understand how it would. It's and it illustrates.
I grew up next door to a police officer as a kid growing up, and when we would be playing, his name was Danny Gonzalez. When Mr. Gonzalez was going on patrol, all the kids would line up, give him a hug, a little kiss, and they take off. And of course, I think I was probably 10 at that time. I'd say, so why do you guys do that? And they said, because we never know if our dad's coming home that night. And I'm like, wow, I know my dad usually comes home at night. I mean, he just worked at a bank. But, so growing up, I saw both sides. And it wasn't until I got elected to office as a county commissioner and seeing what the sheriff's department does. And then I realized the distinction, and for your listeners out there, University Avenue is you can be pulled over by about 4 or 5 different agencies, by the way. So Mesilla Police, DASO, Las Cruces Police, New Mexico State University Police, and the state police. So that's one. That's what's that?
And the Border Patrol.
And the Border Patrol. And so on that one particular road, that is the border to everything. So anyways, I thought I'd just share that with you.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Johana, I want your thoughts on this, the idea of routine assessment of police body camera footage to try to offer training to officers who may need improvement in terms of their interactions with the public.
Absolutely. I think that's a great idea. I also believe that there's an inherent problem with body cam footage, with body cams in general. I think while they're an important step towards accountability, it's just not enough. I think we've seen over and over here in our community and across the country that there is often footage that is revealed after a terrible incident where somebody's life is lost. There are police officers across the country who have been filmed by cell phones doing pretty terrible things, and we still see no justice and we still see no accountability. I think the real question here is with body cams is what comes next? What is the repercussion? What is the consequence to these routine assessments of video footage where you see misconduct? What happens then? That is not simply you get desk duty, you get you're let go of your job duties, paid leave, or any of those things, right? That the community inherently don't see as actual fairness or even good use of public dollars. I think often we hear police departments refute this idea of wearing body cams because of storage, Yeah, we live in 2020 where there are great strides in technology, and I am certain that we can figure out how to keep more and more storage from those body cams. I will
Well,
add
and
that
Johanna, another issue, as you're well aware now as a city councilor, a few years ago, KRWG News did an investigation looking at the addition of body cameras in Las Cruces. Now, this was several years ago, and yes, they were expensive several years ago, but the cost of lawsuits far exceeded even that one addition of a number of body cameras to the city. So they certainly are a tool to assess how well or how not well the police are doing in terms of interacting with the public. And of course, my question in this case is dealing with being proactive, trying to prevent lawsuits, prevent problems. Your point well taken, that sometimes when the cameras do reveal a problem, the actual way that that problem is handled does not reflect in many people's mind justice. And that's key to why we're really having this conversation today. We're quickly running out of time, and so Eileen, I want to get to you for our next question.
Yes, Counselor, I think you've already partially suggested that some police calls could be better served by other social services. So how might that work?
great, easy question, right to the point. I think this is a question regarding community safety and what that actually means to so many communities, where in many communities, people feel safe to call the police if something is wrong in their home or in their neighborhood. And in many other communities, people do not feel safe to call the police. Those communities tend to be low-income communities, communities of color, immigrant communities, Black communities, Indigenous communities that actually do not feel safe to call the police. It's even been reported that many domestic violence victims also don't feel comfortable calling the police for fear they will not be believed, many for fear perhaps they will be deported, right? And so I think we see over and over again, like I said earlier, that we have over-relied on police and frankly placed a burden on the police department for handling some of these social problems that exist in our communities. And so we should absolutely be building systems and structures within the city that actually handle and they don't actually have to be just related to folks calling in and a social worker answering and being deployed to their home. I'm talking about programs that will focus on reducing the city's poverty, which we've discussed in City Council recently, which is at 24%, which is not okay in my eyes. It is not okay that we have so many folks living in poverty. So reducing poverty, programs that specifically designed that are anti-violence programs. We just heard of a story of 16-year-olds who were involved in a gun shooting over marijuana. There are things we can do to decriminalize drugs. But I think about those 16-year-olds and I wonder, where as a community did we fail them? Where did we fail them that they ended up in this situation? And unfortunately, at the end of the day, police departments can only be reactionary to these sort of situations. What we need in place is to ensure we're working with school boards and the Las Cruces school district to ensure that they have the funds to have counselors in every single school that can identify students who are struggling either financially, mentally, emotionally, right? And I think we really need to look at prioritizing what our community need. We will reduce violence if people have a place to call home, a safe place to call home, if people have access to food, if people have access to physical health services, mental health services, addiction services. If we set these things in place, and I'm not saying it'll happen overnight, right? But if we set up these structures in place, we will actually begin to see a reduced role, perhaps even a more focused role for police departments, where their sole focus is some of those very much aggressive, violent folks in our community that are not very many, right? But they do exist. So I think with setting up these structures, we do two things at the same time. We take care of the most vulnerable in our community, thus reducing the need for police, and focus the resources that police actually are using in a more strategic way, in a way that actually keeps communities safe. I believe that the current system does not do that. And because we're running out of time, and I don't want to miss saying this, the mayor actually made an excellent point about who can pull you over. Las Cruces is a very over-policed city, incredibly over-policed. And I think that that is an important key element that we should consider as we continue having conversations about community safety, and community safety for whom, and who it works for and who it doesn't.
Mayor, let me get your response to that. Do you think Las Cruces is over-policed?
Well, the guidelines suggest that you have one police officer for every 500 residents. We have a little bit over 100,000 residents, so that means we should have about 200 uniformed police officers, and we're about 10 or 15 shy of that, so I don't think we're over-policed. But okay. I will tell you this much, and what Councilor Bencomo was talking about is she's absolutely right, and I think that's why early childhood development really is important, because if you are able to get with the parents and also with the child as they're developing, as they're growing up, to recognize all the different things that the Councilor Bencomo discussed, it would help them.
It sounds like both of you agree that social services is something that we do need to look at. Mayor, we only have about a minute and a half left, and I want to ask about one other question. At a Doña Ana County Commission meeting recently, a Las Cruces police official said that the city police department had 1,500 mental health calls in 2019 alone. 1,500 on mental health. As you know, the county is planning to open a crisis triage center. What is the city planning to do to help in this regard?
Well, it's interesting that the study that you're talking about 90% of the calls reside from city residents. So only 10 are outside the city. So, and those 90% represents about almost all, maybe 85% are able to be paid by Medicaid. So I think it's important that the city be able to partner with the county to help with the crisis triage center. Right now, there is an issue that the city is looking at, well, not the city, but a particular council person that wants to maybe use a different company. And if we do that, then you're going to take away the Medicaid money that's available, and it could hurt the crisis triage center.
So it's likely we're going to hear more about this, I guess, Mayor, that the city is going to have to address how to help the county in whatever form it takes to have this triage center.
Right,
well,
because
what a great discussion. I know we've only begun it, and we're going to certainly have to have more discussions.
Well, let's just go another half hour. And
it would be nice. We unfortunately have run out of time, but we will have a future program as recommendations are developed to look at those recommendations. Mayor, Johana, and Eileen, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Fred.
That is Issues and Answers Police Oversight. We thank our guests and my co-host, and we want to remind you that this program is co-sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Southern New Mexico and the NAACP of Doña Ana County. For all of us at KRWG News, I'm Fred Martino. Thank you for being with us. Have a good week.